Ari ran hard. His breathing had begun to be irregular, not ignored whether thorns or what felt scratched his arm. Silent and humid forest, full of trees, making Ari lose direction. Plus, the thick leaves scattered over the wetness of the ground, which was criminalized by rainwater. But immediately, Ari stopped after some thickening thick white fog that covered his view. Right in front, a few meters, a deep and thick gap. Ari was weak, despair increasingly looming him. With his hands above the knee, he tried to calm my heartbeat that had begun to abysmally. Ari looked around to make sure the situation was safe. Ari slowly leaned his body, which began to be tired. The night wind feels more cold. Not feel the feet also feel sore after running on muddy soil. Muddy, like his arms, his legs were the best of dozens of thorns. The feeling of fatigue began to improve. Without any forest lighting, it really looks pitch black. After a while, Ari began to continue his steps to walk along the ground filled with large trees and shrubs. Suddenly, from behind, someone patted his shoulder. For a moment, Ari did not dare to look back. The voice of an old woman greeted him, as if breaking the silence. Ari immediately turned his gaze down. It turned out that the grandmother's feet were on the ground. The meaning of reason, just playing with friends in the river, then there are those who chase him. And suddenly he arrived in the forest. The grandmother also offered water to stay at her home. And the next day a way out of this forest will be shown. Aripun walked behind the grandmother who guided her. Suddenly the scent of jasmine was very pungent. After passing through several towering teak trees, it did not feel at the end of the village, which was marked by standing 2 gates made of red brick. What was felt by Ari, while walking following the grandmother, his steps felt floating and light, even though Ari was feeling very tired. Just now, they entered the village. 2 tigers came, approaching to welcome them. The tiger immediately submits, as if he saluted the grandmother. Ari, who saw it, was only stunned on the lips of the gate. Then the 2 tigers immediately moved out in one of the houses next to the gate. Ari, who first entered this village, was surprised because there was not the slightest lighting in his house. This village looks old-fashioned, like old uninhabited houses. None of the house looks comfortable to visit. All of them look sinking. Ari also continued to follow the grandmother, heading to her house. Everything looks quiet, as if there was no life in the village. And finally they arrived. The grandmother immediately invited Ari to enter the house. It also seems not much different from the other house. The grandmother's house looks quiet with a scary aura. For a moment, Ari entered the house. The smell of incense was immediately smelled and the flowers that burst. The grandmother immediately turned on the lantern's axis on the table. The room that was originally dark black now looks a little brighter. The living room is only filled with 1 table and chair. There is nothing strange about the shape of the object. It's just that for a moment Ari was about to sit, it looks clear, the table and chair are dusty, as if never touched. Ari slowly looked around the room. The house looked empty and quiet. Then suddenly my grandmother, came out with a plate of food and a glass of water. With his flat face and sharp eyes, the grandmother put him on the table, and the grandmother immediately sat in front of Ari. For a moment, Ari was about to devour the food served. Suddenly heard, "Don't eat. Run quickly." Instantly Ari frozen, asking in his heart who whispered earlier. The grandmother kept staring at Ari. Makes Ari feel reluctant if you don't reach the food that has been provided. Slowly reach a glass of water on the table. But he was just about to sip. Smell fishy from the direction of the glass. Then Ari won fried foods, and he wanted to taste. Just got one bite. Ari felt nauseous, wanted to vomit. A moment later, the grandmother immediately entered to one of the rooms in her house. A few seconds later, the white smoke came out of the gaps of the door that was not tightly closed. Ari also tried to approach the room. Just about to approach, faintly from the outside, the steps of the human foot were walking. Aripun slowly tried to open the front door. His eyes immediately widened after finding a group that was walking. And in his ranks, the group of creatures is strange creatures, and one of them is a creature who is chasing him. Being in the back row, there was a friend of Ari who was the same as playing in the river. He walked with an empty eyes. Suddenly it was heard again, a faint voice that told Ari to leave immediately. Clearing the incense smoke that filled the room as if piercing the nose, increasingly clearly visible from the grandmother's room. Slowly, Ari tried to peek, and a name above the straw doll authored the name Ari. Ari was very surprised, but he did not dare to scream. See that slowly Ari came out of grandmother's house, and he ran as fast as he was able to. Back again, Ari passed through the heavy trees. The sound of forest animals did not want to lose, making the atmosphere more tense. Ari ran towards the group who brought his friend earlier. The group of strange creatures was seen gathering. The school would hold the ceremony very carefully. Ari climbed the land buried in the leaves so that the sound of his steps was not heard by the group. His hypnotized friends were ranked as if they would be used as a ritual of offering. Seeing that Ari was getting shocked, Ari's strength ran away from the group. The choice is only one. He had to get out of the supernatural village. Ari ran and kept running, ignoring the pain all over his body. Ari ran towards the initial gate into the village. From a distance, 2 black beetle tigers keep the border right in front of the village gate. Ari was getting confused. How could he pass the tiger? Then Ari hid behind the wall of a house while waiting for the opportunity. But unexpectedly, looks like the beetle tiger smells the human smell from his body. Ari, who realized it, immediately took off her clothes. Slowly, the beetle tiger is approaching the direction of human smell. But only Ari's clothes were left behind, while Ari, who saw the opportunity to run away, with all his strength ran out of the gate of the Gaib village in a naked state. For a moment he made it through the village gate. Immediately the light disappeared. Then sounded faintly. The mother's voice called out to call Ari's name. Ari slowly opened his eyes. in a small hill next to the rice field area, which is quite far from residential areas. Live an old woman named Mbah Yut, or commonly called Mbah Uyut. Mbah Uyut lives alone, without relatives. Daily activities: gardening in front of his house for his food needs. The rest, Mbah Uyut used to sit on the porch of his house while silent, looking at the rice fields around. No one knows much about the life history of Mbah Uyut. Have he ever had a husband or not? But as long as he lives in the village. Apparently, so many bad rumors about his life. Some say that Mbah Uyut is a follower of black magic. In fact, many also said the young era of Mbah Uyut had secretly opened an illegal practice which helped people abort the womb. And not only Utu, other rumors say that Mbah Uyut is a ritual of black magic rituals, namely by utilizing the fetus, the result of abortion, for offering ceremonies. But there are also those who say that Mbah Uyut is a good person. Because Mbah Uyut, always being friendly to small children who happen to be through his house. And also Mbah Uyut often shares food with these children. Even so, one thing which cannot be denied from Mbah Uyut, namely his distinctive and shrill laughter, makes goosebumps for anyone who hears it up close. Finally, a few years later, Mbah Uyut was found dead alone in his hut. Which is his death, it is unknown to anyone. Even his body was found lying rot, just like that in his hut. Until an odd event emerged in the village, when in the funeral process of Mbah Uyut, which happened to be carried out at night, residents agreed so that the body of Mbah Uyut to be buried as soon as possible, because seen from the condition of the corpse, which is not possible to wait tomorrow morning again. And finally, even the process of excavating grave began to be carried out. Pagdetarjo is a grave dipper in the village. He was preparing to be ready to leave for the Mbah Uyut Cemetery TPU location. Incidentally, Pagdetarjo, his arrival, was estimated to be a bit late because of sudden matters. The day before, Pagdetarjo was busy repairing diesel engines for village rice field irrigation. When on the way were Pagde, who at the time chose to walk to the TPU location. For a moment, passing through a garden planted with many teak and banana trees and lush wild bamboo. The dark night atmosphere, Pagdetarjo turned on a flashlight and a small lighter to illuminate the road to avoid snakes. Pagdetarjo continues to step and focus on the paths that are covered with many dry teak leaves that continued to wipe noisy armpits in the inversion. Suddenly vague, the sound of a coughing person in the distance. Pakde stopped instantly and turned his head to ascertain what he had heard just now. But there is no one. Really lonely, and there is only the sound of night animals that are shouting with each other. After feeling that there was nothing, Pakde returned to continue his path. Suddenly sounded again the voice of someone who called him his name. Pakde turned and confirmed again. His voice sounded like the voice of an old woman. Start the scary air approaching the hair on his neck. Suddenly Pakde began to feel bad, but when he was about to step on the feet, suddenly a lush bamboo tree on his right swayed loudly, along with a distinctive laugh that sounded very loud and terrible. Pakde Tarjo's body suddenly trembled rigidly, unable to move. His feet felt lifeless. It turns out that, in the bamboo tree, standing an old grandmother with a hunchback body that was hanging on the top of a bamboo tree and laughed loudly. The terrible figure, staring cynically at Pakde Tarjo. Until finally, Pakde Tarjo Lunglai fell rigidly on the ground because he was controlled by fear. The figure of the terrible creature at a glance is similar to Mbah Uyut, the figure slowly crawling closer towards Pakde Tarjo, who was lying. Then smelled a very unpleasant aroma like a mixture of shrimp paste and also mouse carcass. The figure was even closer and closer, until Pakde Tarjo's view finally pitch black. The day changed. The village community flocked to the cemetery. And it turns out that morning there were 2 funerals at once. Namely the burial of Mbah Uyut's body and the funeral of Pakde Tarjo, who died suddenly, without a single person who knows the cause. His body was found stretching rigidly between teak trees. By people who happened to be going to the fields in the morning since that incident. The atmosphere of the village became tense. No house dared to open the door at night. In fact, none of the villagers who dared to come out when the evening call to prayer was finished. The faster the rumor is spread that the spirit of Mbah Uyut roaming in the village was to ask for sacrifice. "20 years ago, in this village, a very terrible event occurred. A mute girl named Murni, in wine by residents, headed to the open field. The girl was accused, had committed immoral acts against the village head. The man admitted that Pure Silent often peeked at him in the room, and that night, purely caught into the room of the village head who was sleeping and harassing. Pure the mute girl can't defend herself. The village head called his gardener, Tarjo. Tarjo summoned the residents and was purely in the judges. In the middle of an open field, purely the mute girl, with a weak body in the burning life in front of all villagers. Pure is the only child from Mbah Uyut. This young girl was born mute, even so Mbah Uyut really loved her. One time, Murni asked permission from Mbah Uyut to work at the house of the village head, from the next village as a maid. Mbah Uyut also allowed the will of his daughter. Murni works very diligently at the residence of the village head. Until one day, the village head was also interested in the pure beauty of the mute girl. Every time there is an opportunity, the village head always tries to tease Pure. And in the end, after a few months passed, Purely complained to the mother, Mbah Uyut, that she was pregnant. How destroyed Mbah Uyut heard the pure story of the treatment of his employer. And on the last day of Pure's departure, after telling that, Murni never returned. Until finally it was heard that there was a mute girl who was burned to live in the next village. That night, after Murni told the mother, Murni quickly rushed to the house of the village head and said that she was in two bodies. How shock and fear Mr. Village Head. He was very afraid that his good name would be polluted in the village and could be able to position as the village head directly removed. If caught, they have committed immoral acts with their own aids. Finally, Sekongkol village head with Pakde Tarjo to slander Pure, at the same time destroy evidence. With his anger, Mbah Uyut deliberately came to the village for revenge. Mbah Uyut deliberately took the ashes of pure bodies to play black magic and terrorize all villagers. Tonight is Suryo's duty at night. Suryo is a factory guard in charge of checking the factory and at the same time absent night. The factory where Suryo's workplace is indeed scary. the beginning of entering the factory, the surrounding air feels different, as if many invisible eyes were watching him. Surya always tries to calm down. Every time she feels goosebumps while traveling around. Some of the places he checked the situation. The atmosphere of the night at an empty factory really made the hair goosebumps. And the ghost of a Dutch child often appears when Suryo is in the evening. But Suryo always tried to ignore it. All places look safe and controlled, although the ghosts continue to appear. Until finally, suddenly the sound of goods fell from the storage room. Suryo quickly ran to check the situation. At first it was not visible things, but then a black pumpkin appeared, which rolled towards Suryo. Looks odd, because there is a pumpkin in the factory. Suryapun grabbed the pumpkin, and suddenly the black pumpkin grinned with a spooky laugh. Suryapun immediately ran away because he panicked. The pumpkin head continued to chase him while giggling. Suryo kept running and running. Unconsciously, the factory room suddenly turned into wilderness. For a moment, Suryo stuck, but he tried to stay calm and keep going, and the sound of the ghost of the Dutch child continued to be heard following his steps. This situation is even more confusing for Suryo. Until the emergence of a large escalator who was busy digging the ground, then just disappeared. Amid his confusion, Suryapun continued his steps. The escalator was seen digging land in residential areas, and several human frames emerged from the land that was explored. Until finally the excavation of the land turned into a funeral, and finally changed again into the factory building frame where he worked. Still in his confusion, Suryo tried to remain calm and continued his steps to check other rooms. Even when he examined the outside of the factory building, the ghosts continued to follow him. Unable to take it anymore, finally Suryo called his friend to come to accompany him to guard tonight. Because tired of waiting, finally Suryo overslept. Some ghosts tried to bullize Suryo while sleeping soundly. But he woke up because vaguely giggled. Again, the ghost of the pumpkin head appeared and chased after Suryo. Suryapun immediately ran away. Until finally, he crashed into someone. The friend he called was finally coming. His friend told me that there were indeed many ghosts in the factory. Bored with ghosts, Suryo finally decided to go to buy coffee first. The dark story about this factory is why there are many ghosts. Because this factory is built on a burial land, and the houses of the residents who are forcibly evicted. In fact, many bones are not buried anymore with Kaya. That that's what makes the spirits angry and often terrorize factory employees. When out of the factory building, suddenly a papaya tree bearing a thick fruit. Even though Suryo felt the papaya tree did not exist before. Because there are so many fruit, Suryo is tempted to take it. As a friend, to drink coffee later. For a moment, Suryo was about to pick. Suddenly the papaya tree turned into a kuntilanak and turned into a ghost of the pumpkin head, who kept chasing him while giggling with the scary.
Sambil cekikikan dengan menyeramkan.
Mawar's corpse was found in a part of the body separately. In one of the bathing locations. The discovery of the corpse was found by one of the visitors to a bathing tour who happened to want to defecate. While running, the local citizen was reported immediately. Residents also flocked to the scene and found another piece of the victim's feet. Without thinking of residents, immediately reported the discovery of the corpse to the police. The police who received the information immediately supported the location and carried out the crime scene and gathered witnesses who were suspected of having information related to the discovery of the foot pieces. All members of the body that are mutilated meat except the victim's head. Many suspected that the victim's head was taken away by wild animals. Based on the statements of all witnesses and evidence obtained from the crime scene, finally the police set 3 people suspected of being the murderer of Mawar. The first named Rudy Rudy is one of the parking attendants at the tourist spot. Rudy is known as a young man who likes to get drunk every night and also often tempts female visitors who want to park. Then the second is Pak Ikang. Mr. Ikang is a cleaning guard and a clean. A year ago, Pak Ikang had been entangled in an immoral case in his previous workplace. Namely, the action of Mr. Ikang caught while peeking at the occupants of a female boarding house while in the bathroom. Then the third is Dion, Mawar's own lover. Who was Dion, who came with Mawar when he came to the tourist spot. And was more suspicious. Dion even returned from the tourist attractions alone without roses. But according to Dion's confession, he and Mawar quarreled at the tourist bath. And finally, the young man left Mawar alone. The lover insisted that it was not him who killed Mawar. Even he dared to swear expletives, wanting to take the Pokong oath as proof. Indy is observing the body of the mutilation in the corpse. The condition of the corpse of Mawar looks very pathetic. Then the police also checked the CCTV in the tourist attraction, but unfortunately there was no CCTV that directly led to the small forest behind the baths. Some CCTV recordings were seen. Rudy and the parking attendant was angry at some visitors, and one of them was Mawar. Even Mawar to throw money at Rudy because he was so upset. Then Mawar left. And clearly seen, Rudy the parking attendant with an angry face and really wanted to vent his frustration to Mawar. But when interrogated by the police, Rudy, the parking attendant, argued that Mawar refused to give a parking money to him, so there was an argument until finally Mawar threw money at Rudy in annoyance. And Rudy also denied that he was not the perpetrator of the murder of a Rose, because after that he no longer met Mawar. Then the police also interrogated Mr. Ikang, who was found to have been found by a girl's underwear. And the police suspect the underwear belongs to Mawar. Even his lover, Dion, confirmed the allegation. The underwear that Mr. Rudy was owned by Mawar. The underwear that was about to be used as a change of clothes after playing in the bathing tour. While Pak Ikang himself denied strongly that it was not the one who committed the murder of Mawar. Then the police also checked Mr. Ikang's stay. Apparently found a lot of women's underwear, hidden in his closet, who knows whose. The police also scattered Dion. Why could he know that it was Mawar's underwear? Dion Pun argued. Because he was carrying a Rose bag. Hearing the statement from the 3 suspected perpetrators, the police became more confused. Who was the real suspect? Back to the body. The soul of the Rose was standing behind Indo. The spirit of Mawar approached Indi and looked at him directly in front of his eyes. Indi also entered another dimension where the terrible event was ongoing. Mawar and his girlfriend were seen intimately coming to the bathing tourism. Then they look for a quiet place to make out. And when his girlfriend is Dion, asking for more relationships, Mawar rejects him. Without thinking, the lover goes with an annoyed face. A few moments later, because of emotions that could not be damned due to Rose's rejection, the lover returned and immediately hit Mawar's head. Instantly the rose fell and his head hit the stone. The lover panicked because Mawar immediately died in that place. The more panic must eliminate traces. The lover took out the cutter from his pocket. cutting event occurred. The young man dug up the ground using a piece of wood. With difficulty, he dragged and burying some of the corpses of Mawar. Because of panic and fatigue, the young man could not dig too deep, so that some of the roe's body was only covered with dry leaves. While the head of Mawar just thrown into an area not far from the bath. Indy returned to the real world. While at the police station, Pakikang, the guard of a tourist attraction, finally admitted that he often stole the underwear of female visitors. But he did not know it was anyone's underwear. Then the telephone rang. One of the policemen who had been angry at Mr. Ikang finally picked up the telephone. The caller says that the head of the rose is in the back gap. After the discovery of Mawar's head, the police invited the 3 suspected perpetrators to see the body of Mawar's body. When shown a piece of Rose's head, Rudy, the parking attendant, immediately vomited, while Mr. Ikang looked scared, and after being shown by the head of Mawar, Mr. Ikang immediately fainted. While Dion just paused to see the body part of the rose without reacting anything. For a moment, he was put in the prisoner's room alone. Dion just sat with an empty eyes. The night was getting late. The other prisoners had fallen asleep while Dion was still awake. Suddenly vaguely heard the sound of a woman crying with sad. Slowly appeared a terrible figure of a rose with blood closer to Dion. Dion screamed in fear. Finally, the police set Dion as a suspect, staying because when the discovery of the chopped head of the rose, there was also still stuck in Dion's cutter, which was a tool used to mutilate the lover.
Enda is a widow without children, and this is the day of her third husband's funeral, while her first husband also died mysteriously. Mothers continue to gossip behind Enda's back, as if without caring about Enda's feelings of grief. Their marriage has only been 1 month, but fate said otherwise. The husband died today without cause, even though last night, Enda still had time to talk with her husband, and he's in good health. Suddenly this morning, the husband was found dead in his room. There were no signs of anything. The news of this death certainly raises big question marks for residents when the funeral procession is finished. Enda was still kneeling beside the red mound, while scattering flowers on her husband's grave. This is the third time that the man who became her husband has died without cause. Since my third husband died, bad accusations continued to flow towards Enda. Many people think they have used black magic. There are also those who say that Enda is bad luck, because it always causes men close to him to die. Even though Enda felt that before, there were great hopes when she decided to marry her third husband. He hopes that all societal prejudices can be broken. However, in the end, this suspicion became stronger and led to the end. The mother is Mrs. Martini, mother of Enda's first husband. Since the death of his son, Mrs. Martini lives with Enda. Enda and Mrs. Martini both have no family. Enda's parents have also died, so that's been considered. Mrs. Martini as her own mother, from her husband's 3 families. Only Mrs. Martini did not blame him for the child's death. Her first husband died in an accident, exactly a month after getting married. No one knows the cause, but residents always accuse Enda of being the mastermind behind it all. The death of her third husband makes Enda even more traumatized, if she decides to remarry another man. The cemetery area is quiet. There were only Enda, Mrs. Martini, and her third husband's parents. Her third husband's mother was also seen still sobbing over her son's vortex. Suddenly, my third husband's mother stood up and stared sharply at Enda, the mother-in-law's angry tone, getting higher and higher, looking confused and sad that can no longer be stopped. But Enda just kept silent, because even though it hurt, but what the mother-in-law said was reality. If I hadn't agreed to it first, this definitely wouldn't have happened. All the curses made Enda's tears even harder. Meanwhile, Mrs. Martini continued to calm Enda. The 2 middle-aged women, actually arguing with each other. Enda tried to intervene, because they shouldn't be like this in front of their husband's still wet grave. Finally, the dispute was over, after the husband pulled him away. My husband's parents decided to go home, while I'm still in the tomb because I feel like I want to stay here for a long time.
But just as he neared the conclusion of the tomb, an unexpected encounter halted his progress. It was Rahayu, an acquaintance of Enda, and a friend of her third husband. In the village, Rahayu and Mas Aji were always involved in activities together. It was no secret that Rahayu had a deep affection for Mas Aji in the past. Now Rahayu is spotted praying by Aji's grave, but as she walks away, a subtle smile appears on her face, leaving us to wonder what memories have crossed her mind. A few moments later, Enda and Mrs. Martini walked outside the cemetery. Coincidentally, Indy was standing on the side of the road, ready to cross, and at that very instant, Enda and Indy's eyes met, exchanging fleeting glances. Suddenly, Indy felt as if she had been transported to another dimension. Meanwhile, the memories of Enda's joyous wedding day with her third husband flooded her mind, and their domestic life continued smoothly.
However, in a closed room nearby,
A faint aroma of incense lingered. Carefully, Enda placed the incense on the table next to her slumbering husband. In front of a large mirror, Enda sat, her beautiful face reflecting back at her with a smile. She gazed at her reflection and uttered, "I will send you a sacrifice and make the beauty of my face eternal." Suddenly, a shocking sight appeared in the mirror, a large snake merging with Enda. Unfazed, Enda smiled even wider, while her oblivious husband, deep in slumber, inhaled the captivating aroma of the incense he had unknowingly ignited. Little did he know the fumes were slowly stealing his life away. As her husband's life faded, Enda's laughter grew louder, reveling in her sinister plan's success. Indy returned to reality, his eyes fixated on Enda and Mrs. Martini. It became evident that 3 male spirits followed, closely behind Enda, husbands who had met their demise at the hands of their own wives.